Hi everybody, Gisele Grenier here with another experimental workshop. I'm going to quickly just go over what led me to this point to decide I'd like to actually do this on camera, just so you can see my process. What I did is I was working on this drawing of a puppy, and no, it's not finished. Well, it may as well be. The season that we're in right now is the fall, and the temperatures are starting to drop. So basically, we turned our furnace on and set it to temperature. So as I was doing this drawing, this is about 4 hours or so into it, and I was drawing. And for those of you that follow me know about my allergies, the furnace came on for the first time, and I started to sneeze quite violently. And I sneezed on my drawing, and it was just so uncontrollable. I just sneezed and sneezed and sneezed and sneezed. Anyway, so without sounding gross, I actually spit on my piece. You can see where the splotches are. And once you spit, that's why we never blow dust away on our graphite. Once you get spit on your paper, it's ruined. So there's nothing you can do about it. So I basically stopped the drawing, but I had put so much time into it, I started thinking of what I could do to try to salvage it. And that's where it led me to this. So instead of working on this piece here, I'm going to work on something else. And if it works, then fine. This is 400 series Strathmore Bristol stock. So right away, I could use a water-based media on it. But less water the better, but if I use acrylics, it's just going to cover up all the graphite. I did do some experiments before this for another project, so that's what this workshop is going to be today. It's going to be taking a graphite drawing and adding some color to it, and I'm going to be using the Decor Traditions with the watercolor medium, okay, because I want to be able to lift up some of that color. So instead of working on this, because of the amount of time I've put into this, instead of working on this, I thought I would go into my journal and start doing some experiments. Now, a bit of history on this journal. This journal is primarily based on 140 to 200 pound watercolor, cold press, and mixed media paper. And the major structure is a concertina, and with individual sheets put into this. And then with the concertina binding, I've also been able to take individual sheets, and this is a flat Australian hinge binding. I've been able to take individual sheets and bind them to the hinge so I can add individual sheets into this. This video doesn't cover bookbinding. It also does not cover drawing. This is basically how to recover from, not recover from a failed art project, but how to try to fix something. And it's basically a technique that I am going to be teaching over the next little while. So basically in this book, so this is a project that I started working on, and this was the very first one. I did this one a few months ago, and I've developed a technique, and it involves graphite drawing with, this one was actually with oils, with an actual image transfer in the iris. So that's how I start building up my experiments. Then I take photocopies to try to place stuff. But this one here is where I actually started. Okay, so I did a very rough sketch, and so this is, let's see, this is with water-soluble graphite with the watercolors, and I started playing with it, and I love this look, and this actual project here I am going to teach. Then I came over here, and I basically did something a little bit different, using watercolors, acrylics as whole, and then with the watercolor, so try to mix the two together. And although I love the look of the watercolor at the back, I lost all my graphite drawing here. Okay, so I'm going to leave that. So basically, I'm going to be redoing this project, and from there, I'll be taking whatever I've learned and apply it to this little guy here. Now, where I got the idea about adding color is, I took this out of my what do I call it, my daily drawings of anything that matters. And I've been doing these are sketches that I do every day, and this particular one that I pulled out I did an outline of Karma, who's a rescue cat. I don't have her here because of my allergies, but I'm very fond of this cat, and I've done a painting of her, but I started adding some color, and as I was starting doing some different things, other sketches, and started adding color, I thought, oh, that could be really, really cool. So I'm going to show you now. Put this aside. Oh, goodness. This is basically what I'm going to be working on. So, and I wanted to do something with an Irish Wolfhound. That doesn't sound right. I wanted to create a piece of artwork featuring an Irish Wolfhound. So I went on the internet. Now, these pictures I won't be using because these are just pictures taken from Google Images. There's copyrights on these. I'm just looking at them for reference. I won't actually be using them as part of the photograph. And with the Irish Wolfhound, the biggest massive dog in the entire doggy world, I was looking more for color, and so there are different colors. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. If you're doing a graphite drawing with adding color, that if you do something where the dog is entirely dark, you will lose some graphite. So the technique really is specific. You need some lights in the dog. So this would work for the face. Okay. This puppy dog here, and this photograph I got from, I wrote everything down, from Flickr, taken from Jamie and Jessica Healy. And at the end of the video, I'm going to put the link where you can actually get this picture because it's under the Creative Commons license, so you are allowed to use it. And it's titled Irish Wolfhound Show 33. And beautiful pose, okay? And with this, though, there's a big heavy blotch of light here. I'm not going to use any of the trees. And the dog I'm actually going to make a little bit darker, okay? Because there's so much light, there's no contrast. So ideally, when you're doing something with drawing of a dog, I like to take two types of photographs. Or three types. One in color, then convert it into a gray tone, and then increase the contrast. So a bunch of different photographs as well. If the image that I'm given as a professional drawing, if I'm doing a professional drawing, is I'll crop out parts of the images to blow it up to look for detail. So with this here, again, this is not a drawing video. This is a adding media to a drawing. I created a very, very rough drawing here. Very quick. This took me maybe 15 minutes because this is an experiment. Right now what I'm trying to do is find the best way to add color in order to do the same thing with the other puppy. Now the reason why I didn't work on the other puppy and create a drawing of that puppy is the amount of detail in that puppy. It's all very, very short fur. Dogs that have long fur are you can draw them much faster than dogs with short fur. Long fur means long strokes. Short fur, short choppy strokes, which takes a long time. So it's much easier just to work on something like this, get the method going, and then I can make my notes on my paper and then go on to then apply it to that one. So in saying that, a pencil, now don't use water soluble, well, all graphite's sort of soluble, but I'm using a harder pencil here so it won't wash away in case I get water. The other thing you can do is get is a pigment liner. Either one, any of the Staedtler ones that are permanent in water. I like using the Staedtler Lumicolor Permanent Special because it's permanent on everything regardless. But mine's run out and I'm too lazy to go into the next room to find the box that has them. So I'm just going to use a pencil. Okay, now for colors, I'm not quite sure what colors I'm going to be needing, so I'm going to quickly just tell you what I have and what I've done. So the colors that I've got, let's see, well, they're all the Deco Art traditions, so it's easier if I just show you in the tray. And then with the watercolor medium, that's a big important part. Okay, so what I have here is I have ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson. Now this is a new one that's typically not in my palette. Transparent yellow iron oxide, and I just gotta get the pigment number. It's PY42. Okay, and because yellow oxide is more opaque, so I'm using transparent yellow iron oxide. No, this isn't burnt sienna. This is transparent red iron oxide. I use these pigments a lot in oil painting because they make beautiful glazes. Burnt umber and titanium white. We're not going to be using a lot of white by itself except until the end. And I have this in just a little plastic tray with a separate tray because it's easier for me to show you the mixes in this on camera. Okay, now I also have some drying gum here, and this drying gum is another word you can get frisket, but I don't like the smell of frisket. So this is just Pebeo drying gum, and it goes on gray. Okay, it goes on gray, and then you just rub it off at the end. So wherever I put this, when I apply the Traditions with the watercolor medium on top, this is actually masking everything out. With this, use the gungiest brush you have. So I went to the local store and I bought the cheapest liner I could find. I will not use my good Royal Langnickel brushes with using we're using this masking fluid. Okay, cheapest brush possible. So don't use anything, because once it goes into here, you can't use this in art unless you just want to use it to apply glue to something. So that's real. Oh, and then the container. Oh, let me just get my little container. So I've got my container of water. I've got some cotton swabs. Okay, so that's pretty well that supply. And I'm just going to use, oopsie, I'm just going to use the Royal Soft Grip brushes to do my painting because they have a nice acrylic handle and they're soft. They're getting worn down, so I will have to find something else or get new ones. My brush that I actually loved working was this number 8 round, but I don't know what I did to it, but it's all hard just on the edges. I think this, when it rolled in my palette, I think it rolled into something that I didn't quite clean, so it's a shame because this is a really, really good brush. So please take care of your brushes, okay? Alrighty. So, the process of applying the paint, I'm going to be working more into the dark colors, okay? And although there's not a lot of contrast in this dog, the colors that I'm going to be using are going to be, with the shadows and that, are going to be more on the blue side, okay? As an artist, you're allowed to do whatever you want, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply that masking fluid. So I'm going to take my gungy brush and I'm going to get a paper towel. I will have the line drawing available for this, but I am not covering off the drawing of this. I've got enough drawing videos available that you can get the idea. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is there's a hair covering the eye. Now the drawing is pretty light, so I don't know if you can actually see. So all I'm doing, and don't do this over your drawing, dipping into the gum, drawing gum, bringing the brush into a point, and there's a hair covering the eye, so I'm just going to go right over that. Let's try that again. There we go. There, you should be able to see that now. Okay, that's too much, so I just want you to see what it looks like when it goes on. Okay, so one line like this, and I'm going to make just a few hairs. So anywhere where you want the hair to be white, okay, you're just going to apply it with this. And I'm just looking at the photograph, and it's going to be where the areas are the lightest. And when I showed this technique to a couple of my I call them in my face students, face to face, and on camera, they say, well, if you're drawing this stuff, putting this stuff on, don't you need a really, really good brush? No, get a brush that comes to a good fine point, but don't spend a lot of money on it. You don't need anything. These are disposable. Okay, because they won't last very long. I mean, you have to wash them really, really well. So I'll let this soak in Winning Colors. Sorry, 1000 plus stain remover. They changed their name. I'll let this soak overnight. Try to make it last as long as possible. because all the brushes that I use, I have to bring them in from the States, so I'm not going to spend the money on brokerage and shipping fees to bring in cheap brushes. So these I just buy at the local art store. It's the cheapest brush. I think this cost me a whole $1.25. There we go. These are the brushes that if I have teaching young people, I get them to practice a technique with these if they don't have their own brushes. But the drying gum, it's very little smell to it. But the traditional frisket, I can't stand the smell. Absolutely can't stand the smell. So see what I'm doing? Wherever the areas are light, I'm just pulling out. This is to create that contrast. Now in his mouth area here, it's really cut. That's the one thing with the Irish Wolfhound. They look really straggly. Okay, so I'll put just a few more here because it's going to be quite dark. And when this stuff dries, you can just rub it off. Now, because there is quite a bit of drying time involved with this, because it is an experiment, I'm not going to do everything all at once, because I've already done that with another experiment, is this video, although it should be only maybe around 60 to 70 minutes, it will be done probably over a span of a few hours. Because I'm not going to basically show the drying time on camera. That would be kind of a waste of time for you guys. But what I can do now is, and this part here I'm not going to do off camera then come back at being done. I want you to see exactly how this develops. And when it comes time to the base, I put too much there. Okay, so I'm just going to take a paper towel, just wipe it up. See how it gums up like that? There we go. Come on. Oh, the paper that I'm using, this is 140-pound mixed media paper. That's what I'm using for that. Let me try that again. There we go. So that's the problem with the cheap brushes, that I have to keep bringing it to a point. There we are. Guess if I was a gazillionaire, I could use really good quality brushes, but for this, there's no point. Now, if you don't have drying gum, you could use take the Traditions paints or acrylic paint, tint it a little bit so it's not pure white, and just paint pure white on top of that. For my experiment here, I don't want to do that, but I may. I don't know. I don't know yet what I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to put some here. Now I can also add this where, on top of graphite on the plain part of the paper. I am going to be putting this on the tooth. That's important. There we go. So anything that you want to have to protect the paper from. A little one here. If you put it somewhere where it doesn't belong, you let it dry for a bit and just rub it off. It doesn't take very long. And there's a couple little dots here. There's a little bit of a highlight here. I'll just put that there. There's a highlight on the edge of the nose, under the eyes. I am going to probably come in with titanium white pure underneath the eyes. And we'll just go. And areas where I have to overlap the masking fluid, I let the previous layer dry first. Now, even though this is going to be protecting the paper, once I take it off, if I apply a wash of something else, that'll still work as well, because then the wash will just be a much lighter color. And I like using the traditions with the watercolor medium because I can control the opacity of the paint. There we are. He looks pretty silly right now, doesn't he? He, she, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. Alrighty. We're almost done this. Now what you'll also need to speed up the drying time is if you want to get a heat gun. Don't make the heat gun too hot because it'll actually melt the gum. And this area down here is going to be more in shadow. But you got to make sure you have nice hairs that are going to be a different value, which is that contrast that's lacking in the photograph. And I'm not stretching my paper because this is more of an experiment. But if I was doing this as a professional, when I say professional drawing, commission, okay, for a client. If I was doing this painting for a client, yes, I would be stretching the paper using the Strathmore 400 series watercolor paper. I still use a cheap brush for masking though. Now I'm just going to bring some past the doggy a little bit because when we get the background in there, we'll be able to get some nice texture. As well, with this paper here, it is going to wrinkle up. So if you like the technique and you want to do it, you may want to stretch your paper or just basically just do it in stages. All right, so there we go. So I think I'm pretty well done here. Got some good area here. So all this area here, everything that's got this masking fluid is going to be blocked out when I apply the paint. So I'm just going to let this dry for a few minutes and then we'll start applying our first stages of color. Alrighty, the first thing I'm going to do is start working a background in here. Now I'm taking my large 3/4 inch brush, okay, and I'm going to put some water in my tray, and I'd like this background to be a little bit more on the reddy pink side. Here we go. So it's quite loose and washy. And now one thing to remember is that when you apply a media like this on dry paper, you're going to have hard edges. So it's better actually if you can wet the background first. So I'm just going to come in here, and I just picked up more water. You can see that there is a little bit of paint in here. And I'm just wetting the background. And this is where the paper will start to curl. This is where, you know, typically you would stretch the paper and I don't want any of this red going into the dog, so I'm just stopping right at the outside edge. In the hair, I'm not worried so much because the hair is wispy, so some of it will show through. Now kind of come in with the paint and come in and come in here just on the outside. I'm going to go right over the outside edge. That'll have some wispiness, and come in here and kind of guide the paint where I want it to go. And as I'm pulling the paint out, I'm going to let it fade into nothingness towards the outside. But see here, this ridge, got to get rid of that. But the paper's starting to curl now. You can see. You just basically just guide the pigment. Again, if this was a professional drawing that I was doing, I actually would have this taped to a piece of gator board. But because this is an experiment, I need to be able to frequently move the paper. I'm going to pick up a little bit more. Now this is a alizarin crimson that I'm using. Now watch this. Very, very dark pigments come in here. See? And just guide it. There we go. I'm going to bring that wispy, wispy, wispy. Now I got a little bit into the doggy's mouth. Am I worried? Nope. Just come in with a cotton swab, and now I'm just going to take the cotton swab and just, almost like I'm drying, touch, push, lift, which is going to remove a little bit of that alizarin crimson wash. There we go. But I want some of that background showing through. Okay? And just come into the back. Come back in a little bit more. I'm just going to tilt the paper a little bit. And I'm just going to rinse my brush. Tap on a paper towel. And I'm just going to come in here and just touch, push, lift. Just to really thin that paint out. And I can also use paper towel just on the edge to pick that up. And use my wet brush, damp, go over, and that'll remove some of the paint. That's the beauty with using the Traditions watercolor medium. Now, when doing this, don't use cheap watercolor paper. Oh my God, it'll drive you nuts. Like if you see watercolor paper on sale at the store for like 25 cents a sheet, there's a reason why it's 25 cents a sheet. There we are. And I could do a little bit at the bottom. Now the bottom is dried out, so I'm just going to take a misting brush and just put that in. This area is in shadow, so come in like this, wipe the brush, and come back. If your watercolor paper is too cheap, it's going to bumple up. The fibers will actually come off. Wet the brush, come back in. Okay. For large areas, you can also just take a paper towel that's actually damp, and you can come in, just don't rub too hard. See how it all comes off? And just come back in and redistribute. I'm not going to spend too much time on the background because that's not the purpose of my experiment. There we go. So from this now, I'm going to take my heat gun and I'm going to dry it. And to use the heat gun to dry, what you want to do is have the heat gun or hair dryer close enough to the piece to dry it. Not hot though. You have to be able to hold your hand underneath it. If your hand can take it, then so can the paper. Okay? If you put the heat gun too close to the paper, your paper is going to burn. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit just to show you. And I'm about a good 12 inches away. Now I'm using an actual embossing tool, a heat gun. And this is just because it's quieter than a hair dryer on camera, but you can't control the heat setting on this. That's why I have to be careful. And you can see that as the paint lightens or dries, it lightens up a little bit. Where typically with acrylics, when it dries, it gets darker. Here we go. Alrighty. There. Now, some of the drawing gum still hasn't dried, so I'm going to let this sit for a little bit longer, and then when we come back, we'll put our first wash of color on the dog, and I'm going to start painting the eye. Okay, I'm going to take a 10-0 liner, something really, really small, and I'm not going to wet the paper first, but I'm going into that transparent yellow iron oxide. And I'm not going to dilute it too much because I want the eye to be quite vibrant. And I'm going to go around into the iris. Now, I'm not worried if I cover the black area of the pupil because black will cover anything. I can go right over that. So what I'm looking at first is to make sure that the iris is round. Like so. Okay. And it looks like there's a little white thing there. That's just the glare off the studio lights. Okay, see the shine? That's everywhere where that drawing gum is. And this drawing gum allows the beautiful, the vibrant colors come through. Alright, that was really, really hard. Now, while I'm at it, I'm not going to use an actual black. I'm going to take a little bit of water, not too much. I'm going to take some burnt umber and some burnt sienna. Sorry, let's try that again. Burnt umber and ultramarine blue to create a black. I could use transparent red iron oxide, but it's transparent, so the blue would really take over. And even this is more of a, almost like a Payne's gray. You could use black if you want. I just find it so harsh. I prefer doing it with mixing the colors. Now with this, I'm going to be very careful. I'm not going to go into the iris yet, but I'm going to pick up a little bit of water. I can always add more layers if I want. Make sure your brush is at a fine point, and always, when you rinse your brush in water, always wipe the ferrule. Always wipe the ferrule. So I'm just putting, there's no white of the eye showing. All this is dark. And it comes up right here. So I'm basically using a lot of my graphite as my guide. So scribbling. Bring that down a little bit more. There's only a little bit of white in the corner here. Now that yellow has dried, so I'm going to paint in the round part. And the hair that's coming over is actually covering the pupil. This will take probably a couple of layers. And right now he's going to look like a scary dog. He's going to look like a scary dog right now. Until we can get the hairs growing over. There we go. One thing I'm not going to be using, well, I might not. When you lay the acrylics with the watercolor medium, is that with the watercolor medium, this becomes reconstitutable, so it comes up. So if you wanted an area to remain fixed, you could come in with fixative on top of that. I won't be using fixative for this experiment, but just... And yes, I am spending a lot of time on the eye. The eye is the most important part of the drawing. There we go. Come right down a bit more. Okay, so that actually worked out pretty well. And now what I can do, I can go on to the other areas. So I'm going to, because I want to get a lot of first strokes, is that I like doing that with the round brush. I can also use a liner brush. I would typically use my number 8 round for this, but it's kind of hard and bristly. I'm going to try first and see how that goes. Now, now the colors I'm going to be using aren't going to be the colors that are in the highlight area. I'm going to use more of the darker colors, like to make it look like that. Okay, those are the types. So browns that are more on the blue side. So if you have a program like Photoshop or something like that, or a graphics program where you can change up the colors, that would be a pretty good thing that you can do. It's just you can adjust the colors in your painting, in the photograph, to represent more of your painting. What I need to do though first is I'm going I'm going to wet the whole area except the eye to do this because I don't want the paint to kind of like stick on the paper. So I'm just going to, with that large brush, avoiding the eye area. There we go, come right in. Okay. So I'm going to come in using that same mixture that I had before, and I have to try this first because it might be a little bit dark. So I'm going to come in with the color, try a wash. Oh yeah, that's actually not bad. Okay. The key here is to make sure that you don't cover up all the graphite. Okay, that's the key. Don't cover up all the graphite. So see how it kind of applies and kind of blooms around because it looks for water. Okay, so this is where you have to have your paper towel handy, wipe the brush, and then just kind of move the paint. There we go. And let it dry. Come in with a little bit more color. It's really dark under here. And I don't care if I cover the lip, because I'm actually going to be making that lip pretty dark. And there's actually quite a dark area here. Just lay that in. This brush is a little scratchy for what I'm doing. So this brush is probably going to end up turning into a glue brush. Used to apply matte medium or something on my thing. So I'm going to put that aside. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to go to my little number 4 brush. Now, I'm going to take some, in the mix here, some red iron oxide, some transparent red iron oxide. I'm going to mist my palette just a little bit. Not because the paint is drying, but because the water is evaporating out of the paint and it's getting a little stiff to move around. Here we go. I'm going to go into that black, and it makes a beautiful golden transparent mix that's on the red side. Pick up a little bit more transparent red iron oxide. There we go. Oh God, that's a beautiful color. Very rich, very juicy. There we go. Now with this, still a little bit damp. When I'm going into a new color, I test it first. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. And I'm just going to apply the wash. And then when I apply the wash, I'm going to leave it. Okay? I don't want to keep going over and over. Let's see how close we can get. Camera will set and it'll back up. There we go. There we go. So I'm just basically applying that color. And if you find that the paint's kind of sticking, you need to either add a little bit more water to the paint or the paper starting to dry out. You don't want your paper to be soaking wet. Now see here, there's a little bump here. Just going to put a paper towel, or you can come in with a brush. Now all I'm doing is I'm following the directions of the fur. Right now that kind of looks really awful. Don't forget there's the gum underneath. And I'm just going to go down here. Hope I don't go off camera too much. I'm going to wipe the brush. I'm just going to push that back in. I want to try to get as close as possible so you can see what I'm doing. But with that, I spend a lot of time looking at the camera and not at my painting. There we go. So see how I'm just putting that on? Now I'm going to just lightly, one spray over my paper, just dampening it a little bit. So when you're doing this, it's absolutely critical that your paint be transparent. so you can see the graphite. And this is actually working out quite nicely. Let me just turn this. And ideally what you want is for your first layer of wash that the entire dog is covered. I'm going to wipe and just going to fix that. You don't want any blobs of paint on the outside. So when an area starts to dry up a little bit, I come back, add a little bit more paint. Now this area right here, you can tell it's dry. I'm going to come in with my brush damp and I'm just going to soften that edge. Paint on dry paper will leave a hard edge. That's why I like to come in with some water to really soften that out. Watch what I mean. See how it just dissolves? The paint just kind of seeps out. It looks for water. So where you start to stroke is quite dark, and then as the paint seeks out water, it just thins out and dissolves. See here? See the difference? Pick up some water in my brush and come in here. Wipe my brush, get rid of that harsh edge. That's how we do a vignette. Now, another thing is I'm not a watercolor artist, so what I do may not be the norm, but I don't, other than technical rules, like certain things that you really shouldn't do with watercolors and stuff like that, I like adopting my own techniques, because if it works for me, it works for me. So I encourage you to try different things, and you know, if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, then you gotta try something else. I keep coming back with a wet brush, softening out that edge. And I'm getting pretty close now to having to set this to dry. I could also come back over this with even a technical pen. See, as it dries lighter. There you go. So when you're finished your first layer, other than the mouth and the nose, you should have paint over the entire piece. And the nose, I'm basically going to be taking burnt umber and ultramarine blue with a speck of alizarin crimson to warm it up a little bit to make something very, very dark. The alizarin crimson, the permanent alizarin crimson, that's not true alizarin crimson because that's fugitive. Makes a nice dark. And I'm going to come in on dry paper and I'm just going to get the nose started. This is a little bit too red. I'm going to pick up a little bit of blue. And I'm just going to scumbly the nose. And I'm doing this on dry paper because I need the control. Inside nostril I'm not going to be doing yet. And I'm just going to soften that area right up here with a wet brush. Okay, now I'm going to let this dry.